Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
Come to die.
So we got a little bit of news earlier today, which was that Jimmy Butler is actually set to return to the Miami Heat tomorrow after the conclusion of his suspension. Now, does that sound familiar? Well, if it doesn't sound familiar, let me remind you, because it was literally just a week ago, so we don't actually have to go back that far. But when Jimmy Butler came back after his initial suspension, which was the 7 games, the Heat got absolutely torched by the Denver Nuggets. Now, maybe that's not the best matchup to judge Jimmy Butler return, because the Nuggets always kill us, and they're a tough matchup for Jimmy in particular because they're a great team. They got a lot of really big wings, whatever. But 2 games later, the Heat also got blown out by Joe Cronin's Portland Trailblazers. Now, I know you had no Tyler Hero that game, but still, that's no excuse to get blown out by that terrible team. Now, I know between those 2 games, the Heat actually had a blowout win, which was against the Spurs, the game that I was at, so I appreciate the Heat for that. But if you remember, the Heat were down double digits very early in that game, and it looked like they were on the verge of getting blown out again, but then Spoelstra surprised everyone, and that's when we saw the very first Khalil Ware and Bam Adebayo pairing on the court at the same time, at least with significant minutes. And I think that kind of surprise was enough to spark the team into really turning that game around, and they actually ended up getting a blowout win. But regardless, outside of that rare and first-time shocking spurts, the Heat got killed in Jimmy Butler's 2 other games in which he played for the Miami Heat, and overall, it was just not a pretty time at all. Now, I know it wasn't all Jimmy Butler's fault, and I guess most of it wasn't Jimmy's fault, maybe even. I don't know. As far as his on-the-court stuff, he really wasn't all that bad. I mean, he was fine, and the Heat certainly have a lot of other issues outside of him. I also know that in the first game since Jimmy got suspended again, 2 games ago now, which was against the Milwaukee Bucks, the Heat also got blown out without him. But what's very clear is that the vibes are bad when he's there. I think that is very safe to say. And for that reason, I also need to say again, I need to admit once again, because I have before, but I was very wrong. Last time Jimmy Butler was suspended, I wanted him back. And I guess that's what I'm saying. I was wrong for wanting him to rejoin this team. But I mean, I was excited. I figured at the very least, Jimmy Butler would either dominate or he'd be a complete no-show. And, I figured it'd be exciting. It'd be entertaining either way. But really, we didn't get that. It appeared that Jimmy basically did just enough to get by. And like I was saying earlier, I mean, he was fine. So that's why in today's video, I kind of want to discuss whether I think the front office has handled this whole situation good or not. Now, I'm talking since things got ugly, since Jimmy publicly requested his trade that game after the Pacers. I'm talking about how the Heat have handled it since then. Because in the grand scheme of things, over the last 5 years, there's a lot to blame. There's a lot of things you can blame the front office for sure. In fact, this whole situation getting to this point it's at now, I still probably put majority of the blame on the front office for it to get to this point. But then, of course, how it's been handled since and the relationship sort of burning bridges, maybe that's more on Jimmy Butler. But I mean, if the Heat weren't going to pay Jimmy, they should have traded him last offseason. I guess that's kind of where I'm at. But since things have gotten ugly, since Jimmy has requested his trade, I don't think the Heat front office has handled it very well at all. Now, I understand the Heat want to make the playoffs this year. One, because they never tank. They're not about that. And I respect that about them. I expect that they instill a winning culture. We see the 76ers. They started the whole tanking, trust the process thing. And they have not been out of the second round since. And trust the process was what? Started 10 years ago? They got nothing to show for it, although they've had some very talented rosters on paper. And I believe that's because they've instilled a winning culture. Now, like I said, I appreciate that the Heat do not tank, but at the same time, you could argue that's a whole problem in and of itself because it's very hard to get out of mediocrity unless you tank. The Heat got very lucky when Jimmy Butler requested a trade specifically to Miami back in, 2019, 2020, and he was able to pull us out of mediocrity and make us a contender once again. But if Jimmy never did that, who knows where the Heat would have looked like or what the Heat would have looked like for the last 5 years. I don't know. So you could have a whole argument about whether the Heat should tank or sell off all their assets or not, but that's a whole other discussion. But that's one reason that the Heat want to make the playoffs. The other reason is because there's actually some draft pick implications. Now, it's very confusing to get into, and if the Heat do miss the playoffs this year, they actually do have their first round pick because it is lottery protected. A lot of Heat fans love that because I'm told this is a very stacked draft. Obviously, you got some guys at the top that could be real difference makers like Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey. Those guys would be great fits in the Miami Heat. But even down the line, I've heard there's a lot of great players that you can get for good value, around 13th, 14th pick in the draft. But if the Heat do miss the playoffs this year and get their pick, then they actually owe 2 additional first-round picks in 2026 and 2028. They one to the Hornets, one to the Thunder. Whereas if the Heat make the playoffs this year, they only owe like one of those picks, or it's actually the 2027 pick instead of 2 future picks. It's very confusing, and I don't really want to get a lot more into it. 1, because I truly don't fully understand it. And 2, because we don't know what the Heat are going to get in a Jimmy Butler trade if they do trade Jimmy Butler, because they could get some picks that could change everything with regards to the Stepien rule. So it is a bit, there is a lot of variables at this point. But what we do know is that if they miss the playoffs, they essentially have to lose an additional future first-round pick. So the Heat would like to avoid that. They would like to make the playoffs this year for that reason. But the thing is, though, I also think it's safe to say if the Heat keep Jimmy on the roster, and let's say there's not a trade for him, let's say he's here the rest of the year. Let's say they don't find a trade partner by the February 6th deadline. Does Jimmy Butler guarantee you a playoff spot? I think we can say the answer is no, because they have been a playing team for the last couple of seasons. And while the Heat are slightly better in the regular season when Jimmy's out there, of course, in the postseason, Jimmy Butler makes you a contender. He's a superstar. But in the regular season, he doesn't make a significant difference. If you look at last season, the Heat were 33-27 without Jimmy, or with Jimmy Butler. So with Jimmy last year, 6 games over 500. But also last year, without Jimmy Butler, they were still 4 games over 500 with a record of 13-19. So a little bit better with Jimmy Butler last year, but not a significant increase. And then, of course, this season, the Heat are 13-12 with Jimmy Butler. That's 1 game above 500. Whereas without Jimmy Butler this year, they're 9-10. So not a huge drop off there. They're basically mediocre with him in the regular season and mediocre without him. So it's not like he's making you a guaranteed top 6 seed, even if the Heat were to play him. And then even outside of all the numbers, it's definitely hard for the rest of the guys out there, I feel like, to game plan when you have such a significant piece coming in and out of the lineup. So you can argue that if Jimmy Butler was off the roster and you had a set rotation for the rest of the season and these guys knew what it would be, you can argue they would be a lot better than the 9-10 record that they've been this year without Jimmy Butler. I think that's especially going to be the case when you have all these young guys out there. You got guys like Jovic and Ware who are really starting to find their footing, and obviously just adding in Jimmy Butler can complicate a lot of that. Even more so for a guy like Jaime Jaquez, who obviously his playing time and usage is directly related to Jimmy Butler because they play a similar role, similar style as well. During Jimmy's first suspension, Jaime Jaquez really came out in those first 3 games, and he was awesome. I thought he really turned a corner. And then he kind of regressed a little bit. And in the few games since Jimmy's returned and then suspended again, Jaime Jaquez has been up and down, mostly down. But for him, I still think, I know he's an older sophomore, he's 23 years old, but I still think he's a guy that needs consistent minutes and a consistent role because he is a guy that's, at this stage of his career, is not very effective off the ball. They're trying to make him into a floor spacer. He's not that at this point. He is best when he has the ball in his hands and he can attack in the paint, get some post touches, do all that great footwork that we love. He's just better with the ball in his hands. But because of Jimmy Butler being in and out of the lineup and a lot of other guys moving around, it's been hard for Jaime Jaquez to get a consistent usage or a consistent role on this team. And I think that's made it difficult for him. And obviously bringing Jimmy Butler back into the mix will complicate that even more. I'm not saying necessarily that Jimmy's going to stunt the growth of the other guys like Jovic and Ware, because I certainly think Jimmy could play with those guys. We know he's very close with Jovic. We've seen them play well together even when Jimmy came back a week ago or just throughout last season. I think Jimmy Butler and Khalil Ware would be an awesome matchup offensively, defensively. I think it would just be insane. So I don't think it would directly stunt their growth. Obviously, Jimmy's usage rate is not super high right now just because, like we said, he's doing the bare minimum to get by. But just the vibes for those guys in the locker room, the intangible stuff, I don't think can be good for them. You know, if they're still looking at Jimmy Butler as a leader or as a guy who has earned, max contracts in his career, and they think, oh, is this how we can act? I don't think that's a good role model, I guess, for them to see. Now, I understand the Heat are trying to combat that by suspending Jimmy Butler, and maybe the young guys see that and say, hey, well, this is what we're supposed to not do then. But I don't know. I just don't think it's good to have what I believe to be a very toxic environment when you have a locker room of a lot of young guys. Obviously, that's a bunch of speculation. I have no idea what the locker room is like. I know Jimmy Butler is out there saying that his beef is not with his teammates, which I believe. I don't think there's a lot of animosity there, but I also don't necessarily believe Jimmy Butler when you watch these games and you see the young guys playing well and the whole bench is standing all game, whether it's Josh Christopher, Kashad, the two-way guys, or whether it's Kevin Love, Hayward Highsmith, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero. They're all enjoying each other's success to the highest degree, which of course is one of the oldest spoisms. And I think that is a good sign for a very successful team. Enjoy each other's success. But then you compare that to Jimmy Butler sitting at the end of the bench doing his little golf clap. It's just hard for me to believe that he really cares about their success, I guess. Because, okay, you don't like Pat Riley, you don't like the front office, fine. I don't blame you. I really don't even blame you for that. But then you're not happy to see a guy like Nikola Jovic out there balling, Khalil Ware dunking on people left and right. I feel like you can show some emotion and be happy for those guys, and we just haven't seen it. Even outside of that, we've heard guys in the locker room, Tyler Hero, Hayward Highsmith, they've said consistently over the last few weeks, we like the guys that are here. We are trying to win with the guys that are here. I don't think they're indirectly throwing shots at Jimmy Butler. I just think it's the truth. Of course, they're going to take it personal if a guy is saying that I can't win here, I don't want to be here. Because Hayward Highsmith's looking at that, oh, you don't want to play with me? You don't think you can win with me? It's insulting. It really is a personal attack, even if Jimmy Butler doesn't mean it to feel that way. I don't see any other way these guys on the team could take it other than a little bit of a personal attack. Additionally, what if Jimmy Butler, what if he gets hurt? What happens if Jimmy Butler sprains his ankle a day or two before the trade deadline? They had a trade on the doorstep. It was at the 1 yard line, as they say, and then he gets hurt. Does that now axe the trade? He doesn't pass a physical. Do the Suns need to sign off on it? That's just, it's not a good thing that you want to leave up there in the air when you are trying to move Jimmy Butler. Now, I know Jimmy, he'll even post his teammates on IG and social media and stuff, but I don't know. I think it's too toxic. That's what I think. And if he was to get hurt, that would just be a mess. But I guess if you wanted to make some counterpoints to it, someone might say, hey, maybe the Heat are trying to showcase Jimmy Butler so you can get the most for him. I think that's what the Heat are trying to do with Terry Rozier right now because there's no other explanation for Terry to be playing this many minutes. I think the Heat are trying to showcase him so they can say, hey, look, he can still score 16 points on a random Saturday night. Let's go trade for Terry Rozier. Whoever else, another team, whatever. So someone might say they're trying to do that with Jimmy Butler too, which I think is stupid. I mean, one, Jimmy Butler's obviously not trying 100% at this point. And two, Jimmy Butler's 35 years old with injury concerns. That's not going to change over the next week with Jimmy Butler getting some more minutes. He is what he is at this point, and I don't think him getting some more run will change anybody's opinion on him. Now they're saying that maybe they even play Jimmy Butler, or maybe Jimmy's back, but they don't play him. That's kind of what Anthony Chang alluded to in his tweet. Is it's up to Spoelstra whether they play Jimmy, start him, bring him off the bench. If you're going to have him on the bench and not play him, that's even more pointless than bringing him back to begin with. If you are going to have him there and going to have that toxic environment, a toxic locker room, and everyone wants to be happy and celebrate, but then they low-key see Jimmy there and it's a bit awkward, you might as well play him because you are slightly better in the regular season when he's there. So if he, and I don't see any way they bring him back and don't play him, just personally. I know, I guess, I was going to say addition by subtraction is kind of what I'm hoping for with regards to the vibes. Of course, as a team on the court, they're better with an engaged Jimmy Butler, but you're not going to get that. So I am hoping that they can eventually turn it around this season and maybe get into the top 6 spot to avoid the play-in. And we'll see just if the vibes can get a lot better and if the rest of these guys can get consistent minutes. Because I think that's really what you need at this point. And I mean, furthermore, I don't like the way the Heat have handled these whole trade negotiations, or I guess what's been reported on, because we got the reports just like yesterday that the Heat are apparently looking for expiring deals by 2026, win now players, young pieces, and draft capital in any Jimmy Butler trade. And that's just the stupidest thing. All of those things contradict themselves. How can you get win now pieces and also young pieces and draft picks? It's like you're not trading a prime Michael Jordan. You're trading Jimmy Butler, an aging superstar who's demanding a max contract. His value is not that high. And if the Heat really are asking for all those things, I think it's just ridiculous. That's literally the same report we heard about Joe Cronin for the Damian Lillard negotiations a year ago. And I was making a lot of fun of Joe Cronin for that. Even in my skit that I did last year, which was I did a skit of the negotiations between Pat and Joe Cronin. I made fun of Joe Cronin for asking all of that. And in my Joe Cronin diss track, I said, make up your mind, Joe. What you gonna do? You want to win now? You want draft picks? You can't get all that. And in this case with Jimmy Butler, you might not get any of that. I mean, I got I got a notification earlier today. One of the dumbest notifications I ever got said that the Heat are still waiting for best offer before trading Jimmy Butler. Like that, and actually that's the second dumbest notification I got today, because right before I started recording, I got another one that said Kyle Kuzma is growing less patient with the direction of the Wizards franchise. Like, Kuzma, did you think the Wizards were going to win? Did you think they were on the path to be a contender anytime soon? We all know you went there just to get your bread. And now that you got your bread, I'm sure you want to be traded to a contender. Don't act like you're surprised at the direction of the Wizards. It's stupid. But anyways, the Heat waiting for the best offer is stupid because at this point, you might not get anything you want. I think you might just have to settle for expiring contracts because Jimmy Butler is, I guess Damian Lillard or his last year in Portland showed more than Jimmy Butler has this season. And that's why I think Damian Lillard's value was a bit higher, and obviously you didn't have to worry about all this off the court stuff that you're dealing with Jimmy Butler now, because I just don't think it's a good look. I think Jimmy coming out there and saying, I don't want to go to Memphis. I think other front offices seeing, wow, he's beefing with Spoelstra, one of the most respected coaches in the league. I think that's not a good look on Jimmy Butler's character, I suppose, or at least how other GMs might see it. Now, they might just have an outside perspective just like me, but I do feel like it's logical for them to think that way and maybe be a little bit more hesitant to bring in a Jimmy Butler into their locker room. But yeah, I guess I find it hard to believe a trade hasn't been out there because I know the Heat want picks and all this stuff. I don't think it's going to end up happening. I don't see any reason the Suns can't send Beal to another team with 2 of the 3 first-round picks they just traded for. You tell me the Milwaukee Bucks wouldn't trade for Bradley Beal if they got 2 first-round picks attached or 1 first-round pick attached? I absolutely think they would. And then, of course, in that case, the Heat get the expirings they want with Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis. Chris Middleton has been terrible this season. He shot like 0 for 4 yesterday. Obviously, Bobby Portis is still a good player, but he's a bench player. But I could see the Bucks giving up 2 of those guys to get a guy like Bradley Beal and some picks. And now the Miami Heat essentially get Jimmy off the roster. They get Middleton, Portis, and nothing else. Which, yeah, you would like more for Jimmy Butler. You would like if you could have traded him a year ago. Maybe you could have got the most value for him then or even 2 years ago. But you didn't trade him. So now you got to live with the reality of likely getting nothing of significance back in return. But if that means you get expiring contracts, you get off Jimmy Butler's money, and then you get him out of the locker room, and the locker room can become less toxic. It can be a really fun place for everyone again. Then that's just what you got to take at this point. But anyways, the Heat got the Magic tomorrow. So if Jimmy Butler does play, that's a very tough matchup for him. Paolo's back. Franz is back. Franz just scored 25 points in the 4th quarter yesterday. So he is certainly back. There's no rust there. And the last time the Heat played the Magic with Paolo and Franz was on opening night. The Heat lost by like 30. And then the game after the Magic, the Heat have the Cleveland Cavaliers. Obviously, a very, very difficult team to beat, even though the Heat did this year. So it's going to be, it's potentially going to be a couple ugly games if Jimmy Butler returns. And then after those 2, you got 3 more games on the road until the trade deadline, which is the Spurs, Bulls, and 76ers. So not super tough matchups, but they are on the road. So What, is Jimmy Butler going to be there? Or are the Heat going to find another reason to suspend him? Like, that's the thing. If the Heat don't trade Jimmy Butler, what are they going to do? They're going to keep finding ways to suspend him? That's stupid. For a world-class, first-class organization, that's how you're going to go about this, is keep suspending, finding excuses to suspend Jimmy Butler? It's just ridiculous. And then what happens if you don't trade him, and then he opts into his contract in this offseason, and then he's on the team for all of next year? You got to go through this another year and a half at this point? It's just ridiculous. Move on from him, take the expiring contracts, and just wash your hands of it. It's unfortunate it ended this way, but that's the reality. So there's a week and a half until the trade deadline. I'm actually going on vacation from Thursday next week to the following Monday. I think that's from like January 30th to February 3rd. And the trade deadline is February 6th. So selfishly, I do hope if the Heat trade Jimmy Butler, it's before I go on vacation or after I get back, because y'all know I'm going to have to come here and talk about it. But I'll keep y'all up to date with all the news going on. Make sure y'all like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the content. All the support is greatly appreciated. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace out, everyone.
Look, pull up in your city tryna get that dead face. Do it on my own, I don't need no dead weight. Had to kill him off, yeah, I need a head space. You know this homegrown bitch don't offend me.